Well, I welcomed you to Mass, and now I will welcome you to the second week of our message series that we are calling FAQ, which in our case stands for Faith Answering Questions. And over the course of the weeks of this series, we'll be answering a number of different kinds of questions posed by parishioners and others. Some of them are kind of questions of theology and doctrine and church teaching. Some of them are more in the line of pastoral application of that teaching, how we apply what Jesus has revealed to us and what the church teaches us, how we apply that in our day-to-day life. Some of them are in that vein. Others are more specific to our parish, things that we do and why we do them and so on and so forth. So there's quite a variety, but we'll be answering those questions as we go through the series, as I said. Before we move to the questions today, I wanted to once again acknowledge something I mentioned last week, and that is that usually when we come to Mass, the homily or the message speaks directly in one way or another to the readings. But as you can tell by its title, this series doesn't really do that quite so much. And because of that, I'm once again going to make a plug for our daily devotional email. We call it Pray Today, and you can subscribe to it from the homepage of our website. And over the course of the year, it comes out every day. Usually what it does is it calls back to the weekend. So it'll have a little quote that was used in the message and a little portion of the message and the ideas in the message, and go back over them and expand on them maybe a little bit, and then offer an invitation to prayer. The idea is that this email can help you sort of kickstart your prayer for the day. But during this series, because we're not speaking so directly to the readings at Mass, the daily devotional is going to speak only and directly to the readings from the past Sunday. So for example, today we've already covered that intriguing meditation on immortality and death that we heard proclaimed in the first reading from the beginning of the book of Wisdom. So you can subscribe to that and get some meditation and reflection on the readings from this Sunday throughout the week. Now, to the question for today, and it's going to cover a lot of ground. And the question is, I see we have a new mission and vision statement. Where did these come from? Now, before I continue, I must acknowledge that the person who posed this question, this was one of about 5 questions. It was anonymously posed. And the person who asked this question and the other 5 questions they asked, they were very interested and very focused on administration and governance. Who is deciding this and who is deciding that, and how are they deciding it and why are they deciding it? And they were very interested in those things. But they did ask about the mission and vision statement, and I am interested in the mission and vision statement, and you should be too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where they came from and what they are, because they're very important for us as we move forward. And I will just begin by saying that it's true that the new mission statement that we have put in place provoked questions for many. It sort of appeared, and you might wonder what it is and where it came from. But I think if you reflect on that mission statement, you can make a connection between it, and it's in 3 parts, and things that Jesus said in the Gospels. And specifically that mission statement is, love God, love others, make disciples. And with a bit of reflection, you might recall that that speaks to Jesus' great commandment of love from the Gospels. When someone asked him, what is the greatest commandment? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So we have love God, love others. But then also, at a very important moment, the moment when he was about to return to his Father in heaven at the Ascension, Jesus gave his disciples, his church, this command: go and make disciples of all nations. Love God, love others, make disciples. It comes directly from Jesus. Now, we can know that, and it might still be a little bit surprising for us to see that applied to our parish. And that has to do, I think, because of the way we Catholics tend to think about the word church. Practically speaking, when you or I talk about our church, we're really talking about this church. We're talking about our parish, the church building, and the people in it. And that's what we're mostly talking about when we use the word church. But at the same time, we also know that our parish is part of the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church is universal. She's all over the world. And that the Roman Catholic Church understands herself to be the church that Jesus founded. And we also know, each of us knows, that we were incorporated into that church, incorporated into the body of Christ, as Paul tells us, by our baptism. And we were incorporated into the universal church. We were not baptized into St. Pius. We were baptized into the Holy Roman Catholic church. So we know that there is a universal church, and we know that individually we are members of that church. But that can sometimes tend to leave us, at least when we're reflecting on our faith, it can leave out the middle ground. It can leave out the very place where we stand and where we try and live out our faith, our parish. And so very often when we read the Bible and we hear Jesus speak, we tend to think of him as speaking to everyone, to the universal church, the church throughout the world, of which we are a small part. Or, failing that, when we're meditating and when we're trying to pray with scriptures, we're often thinking of Jesus as speaking directly to us as an individual. So we've got the universal church and the individual. And Jesus indeed speaks to both. There's no doubt about it. He does. But we don't always stop to think about Jesus as also speaking directly to our church, to our parish, and we should. Because the universal Roman Catholic Church spread throughout the world, here in North Brantford, that universal church is us. It's no one else. Now, that's not to say that there are not other Christians in this parish, but the Catholic Church understands herself to be the church founded by Christ. And that church, if you're looking for it in North Brantford, you're going to look here. So when Jesus is speaking, he is speaking to our parish. That's why our mission statement is so important to remember. And this has actually, practically speaking, been brought home to us, I think, in recent weeks by the profound experience that we're all going through of sadness and in some cases outrage. And that began with we'll call it the discovery. It wasn't exactly a discovery, it was an identification of 215 unmarked graves at the former Kamloops Residential School, a school that was run by our Catholic Church. And that experience is still going on. If you're following the news, it's continuing. It hasn't gone away by any means. And shortly after that initial discovery, identification, we here at St. Pius offered a special Mass for the intentions of all the children who suffered and lost their lives in and because of the residential school system in which the Catholic Church played a very central role. And we did this because we are the Catholic Church here in Brantford. And so the Church's failings are our failings. And for that same reason, at that Mass, before it at least, as your pastor, I apologized for our involvement in this tragedy, even though, as a parish, to my knowledge, we were not directly involved. But our Catholic Church was involved, and so were we. So are we. This is just true. On the other hand, in day-to-day life in our parish, we, along with many other parishes, most probably, often take a much more local perspective. When we talk about our church, we really mean our church, and we don't always connect it with the universal church. Now, that can be a good thing because, as I noted in one of our recent messages, as Christians, we cannot just belong to the church, we need to be the church. And that certainly includes the local expression of who we are as Christians and as a Christian community. No two parishes, like no two individuals, are going to be exactly the same. There's plenty of room for that. But at the same time, because we are the church, our parish is not just a blank canvas that we have been given on which to paint our vision of what the church should be. The Lord's instructions and his commands come first. And so we have chosen our mission statement. And by that statement, we are saying yes to the Lord's commands and promising to do our best to fulfill them, not just as individual Christians, but as a parish community. Now, hopefully that helps make a little bit more sense of our mission statement. But we still haven't even begun to talk about the vision, about our vision statement. And that statement for St. Pius Brantford goes like this. Our vision is to be a parish with a heart for those Jesus refers to as the lost, those who have not yet encountered the Father's love. In worship, ministry, and daily life, we seek to welcome outsiders and share the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, our vision statement also comes to us from Jesus, specifically from the story in Luke's Gospel of his encounter with Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, as you may know and recall from Scripture, was a tax collector. And tax collectors at that time, it was strange. It was different than it is today. It was really more of a business. Tax collectors, though, were definitely reviled by their community, partly because of their perceived greed. It's true, they were very wealthy, but especially because they, as Jews, chose to collaborate and cooperate with the Roman occupiers, with the oppressors of the Jewish people. Tax collectors amassed great personal wealth, and the way they did it, as I said, was by running a business. They demanded tax payments that were bigger than the amount that Rome expected to collect, and they kept the difference. No wonder they were not well loved. In Luke's story in the Gospel, after Jesus shocks the crowd by choosing to go to Zacchaeus' home for dinner, to have dinner and enter the home of this outcast, this greedy man whom no one liked, after he does that, Zacchaeus responds positively by promising to make amends for his ill-gotten gains. And then finally, if you recall the story, Jesus concludes their encounter by saying to the crowd and to us, "The Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." Jesus came to seek out and to save the lost. We could say to make disciples, echoing our mission statement, but those aren't the exact words that Jesus used. He said he came for the lost. It's not a phrase we use in everyday life. So who are the lost? Well, a glance at Zacchaeus can help us. First, Zacchaeus was an outcast from his society, as I mentioned. So we can look for the lost on the margins, on the edges of polite society. But Zacchaeus was also tremendously wealthy. So if he was on the margins, it might seem to us that there are then more than one kind of margin. You can be doing very well and still on the margins. The truth is that, like Zacchaeus, we today can be materially well off and still be lost. In other words, the lost are all around us, including sometimes in our pews. Now, that's not an insult. Lost people aren't evil or immoral or even necessarily bad. And they don't walk around wearing a sign saying, "I'm lost." That's important for us to remember, because there's a strong temptation for us to assume that if that doesn't happen, if we don't have some obvious sign, so long as someone is not obviously a criminal or struggling to make financial ends meet, then they are probably doing just fine. That's our assumption. We don't assume we ever meet someone who is lost. Jesus never made that assumption, though, and neither should we. Lost people are just mixed up about God. And so lost people might pursue the world, and what the world tells them will fulfill them. And they might even be, in the eyes of the world, very successful in doing so. They're still lost. Lost people come to believe that the way to have a great life is to construct and to make a great life for themselves by controlling everything in it. They're still lost. Lost people can think that one of many, many different things, but all of them have one or more. Money, for example, sex, power, pleasure, financial gain, sports. They come to think that one of these, or maybe more, will somehow fill their life in a way that they haven't been able to. It will fill the ache in their heart, the hole in their soul that was made for God. They're still lost. One way or the other, lost people try to find and make a life outside of a relationship with their Creator, outside of a relationship with God. They miss out on God. And in the process, along the way, they very often mess up their lives. Jesus made lost people his priority, and he went well out of his way to do it. He spent time where they spent time. He knew how to talk to them, what was important to them. He recognized their worries, fears, sorrows, and sins. He understood their hearts, and he loved them by making an investment in them, an investment of his time, of his attention, of his energy. He gave these things to them. Jesus found lost people, and he made them disciples. Sound familiar? Now, just a couple of examples in case you're wondering that all of this is just a little too convenient for me given our parish mission statement. Just a couple of examples. Zacchaeus wasn't the only tax collector Jesus spent time with. St. Matthew was a tax collector as well. St. Mary Magdalene was possessed by 7 demons. Remember the Samaritan woman at the well in the Gospel of John? We hear that gospel every or most Lent seasons. She was such an outcast that she had to go to the communal well under the broiling heat of the noonday sun rather than in the cool of the early morning with everyone else from her community. All of these were lost. Jesus sought them out. And in the end, St. Matthew ended up writing a book of the Bible. Mary Magdalene is quite likely the very first person to whom the risen Jesus appeared. And the Samaritan woman ended up evangelizing her whole community. They were all lost. Jesus sought them out, spoke with them, listened to them, and helped them realize that life can be lived more successfully through a real relationship with the living God. They liked him, they responded to him, and their lives changed as they became more like him. And then they brought others to him to begin the process all over again. You encounter Jesus, you respond to Jesus, you bring others to Jesus because of the good things that have happened to you. This is the whole pattern for the life of the church. We would not be here, each and every one of us today, unless some of you are descended from Palestinian Jews of the first century. None of us would be here today if that wasn't the pattern of the life of the church. Pope Paul VI, St. Pope Paul VI, put it like this in one of his encyclicals. Evangelization, this bringing others to Christ, evangelization, he says, is in fact the grace and vocation that is proper to the church. It is her deepest identity. She exists in order to evangelize. Now, all of this should teach us something about both our mission and vision statements, about what we're trying to do, to accomplish together in this parish, because it all flows from something Jesus knew and that we have likely experienced. And that is that on our own, by our own power alone, our life is going to always be in some way less than it could be, and less than we ourselves in our hearts desire. There's always going to be something missing. Now I'd like to pause for a moment and ask you a question. Our mission statement, our vision statement, and everything I've said this morning flow from one conviction on the answer to this one simple question. Now, if you are here with us today for the very first time, you're not really too sure about this whole Jesus thing, or maybe you're here for the first time in a long time, well, this question today, at least, isn't for you. It may be in the future, but it's not now. Don't worry about answering the question yourself. I'm really talking to people who have been here for years, people who look on St. Pius as your church, as your parish. And I want to ask you, do you believe that in Jesus and in his presence among us, I hope you believe in that, do you believe that in Jesus and in his presence among us here, we have something that your friends, your neighbors, your co-workers truly need? I'm not asking if they think they need it, they might not. I'm asking if you think they need what we have here to share. Do you? If your answer is yes, and I hope it is, during the week ahead, ask yourself, how does my life, my participation, and my commitment to this parish reflect that belief? How am I living the mission and the vision? Now, if you do that, and if you reflect, and if you're like me, you're probably going to find as you reflect that there's some room for you to grow. And that's okay, because that's actually what being a disciple is all about. The original Greek word that we translate as disciple literally means student. Being a disciple is about learning and growing. It's about life change for the better, about a journey from being one kind of person to being another. And that does not happen overnight. It takes time. There's no need for us to be discouraged. As a parish, we have a mission because Jesus gave it to his church. I hope I've made that clear. But we have a vision because we realize that we're not yet fulfilling our mission. And so our vision is about the present, but it's really mostly about the future. It is a vision for us to be, as I said, a community with a heart for the lost. And what's really interesting about that vision is that it's just as much about us as it is about the lost. because it will only be fulfilled first in our hearts. That has to happen before it can be reflected in our lives and in our parish for the sake of the world, for the sake of the lost. Now, that can happen for us as individuals, and we should pray that it does, but it can also happen for us as a community. How so? Well, the recent change we made to the music program at this very Mass, at the 11 a.m. Mass, is one example. At this Mass, we've adopted a musical style that more directly speaks to people in our culture, because it uses the language of personal witness. If you listen to the songs, they speak in the first person, singular. That's not the style of traditional liturgical music. And I say that relates to people because all of us live in this culture, all of us are familiar with this style of communication, but on the contrast, not all of us, and especially people who are not regulars here, not all of us are familiar with the shorthand, the particular images and metaphors that are so important a part of our Christian tradition. It's not that those things are bad things, they're good things. It's that others are not familiar with them, and so we're not speaking to them when we use them. We have also moved to longer messages, connected over a series of weeks that allow us to explore topics in more depth and relate them more carefully to people's lives. And finally, our online and in-person ministries of hospitality. I hope most of you were greeted at the door here today. These are intended to become a visible sign of our desire to welcome outsiders. And at the last Mass, for example, we had 2 families who were here for the very first time ever. These things are visible signs of our desire to welcome others. All of these changes are part of an effort to make the change of heart that our vision is calling us towards, to make it visible in the life of our parish. Let's pray together that the Lord will continue to change our hearts and to help us become known in word and in deed as a parish with a heart for the lost, a parish that makes and grows disciples.